Hello, I'm Charlene from Sound Sewing, Silverdale, Washington, and FOF Creative Sewing Center, Lacey, Washington. This next video we are going to do, I actually had an email from Donna asking if I could show my hints and tricks of actually applying binding to my quilts and my projects. So that's what we're going to do today. You don't need any tools to add binding, at least I haven't used any tools. You just really need a sewing machine and a 1/4 inch foot. Okay. So I have this little accent wall hanging that we do carry the pattern for in our store. Just a little simple little snowman embroidery in the center, and these patchwork quilts blocks at either end, as well as a checkerboard border. So this is something we've had floating around for a while, and on this day at home, and how many times can I clean my house a day, I have decided to start working on these unfinished projects. So asking me to do a binding video was perfect, because I would love to show you how to put a binding on this. So I've already prepared my binding. I use 2-inch wide strips. You could do 2-inch, 2.5, some people do 3-inch. It really comes down to how tight you want the binding to be to the edge of your project and what size seam allowance you are going to do. So for instance, if you were doing a 3/8 seam allowance, you'd want a 2.5-inch binding. Because I am doing a 2-inch seam allowance, I do a 1/4 inch binding. And I pretty much always do a 2-inch binding, because a lot of times I will have patchwork borders, or my patchwork will go all the way to the end without an accent fabric by it, and I don't want to cut off my points with my binding, so I always use a 1/4 inch seam. So I've also made sure my binding is long enough, and what we're going to do is I am going to take my binding here. I've already, so it was 2-inch, and I have already brought it to my iron and folded in half and got a good press all the way down so that I have a fold and 2 raw edges. The next thing I do is just to do a little prepping before I come back to the iron, is I'm going to open this up, and at my beginning end, the end I'm going to start with, I am going to fold this towards me. So I'm taking my top right corner and I'm folding it down to the bottom left, and I'm going to do a seam right here. That is going to give me my join point.
The bane of my existence right there.
I haven't squirted water at you yet.
And
I'm going to fold it in half again to get my good folded point again.
Show that one.
Here we are back at the sewing machine. I have attached my 1/4 inch foot. I am using my FOF Creative 1.5, so I have also made sure that my IDT walking foot is actually engaged, so I made sure it was down. I'm going to take the end that I made sure to have that corner point on, and I always start on the side of my project, just where I do it. So when I do this, I am going to lay this down and pick my spot. I always like to start about 4 to 5 inches down from the point. So I'm going to lay this down on the side, and we come down about 4 to 5 inches, and I will pin it. That is my starting sewing side. I am going to leave this just flopping. I come into my sewing machine. Just be a little bit down from the needle, because if I do that, then I don't have to worry about taking the needle off yet. And now what I'm going to do is line up my raw edge of my binding. The fold is over here, the raw edge of my binding, and putting on the raw edge of my quilt. I'm going to go ahead and sew forward, reverse, and continue going forward again. Now when I get down to this opposite point down here, just like if you've already watched the minor corner border, we have to stop a 1/4 inch in front of this raw edge. So that will be using the front of my 1/4 inch foot. When I get closer, I'll show that to you. Okay, so now I'm getting close. My raw edge of my fabric is right here with my binding over the top. I can see it sticking through here. And I'm going to sew until this line on my 1/4 inch foot is lined up with this raw edge. And then I will bar tack. Again, making sure not to go past that 1/4 inch. And then I'll cut my stitches. Or I'll cut my threads. I'm going to bring it out. And I'm just picking the correct color fabric for you guys to see with this white thread. I see Well, you can see it better on the green side. So I've stopped a 1/4 inch in front of my raw edge here. So what that does for me is that allows me to not put a pin in my mouth so you can understand me. Is I am going to now take this binding and I'm going to pull it up. So I pull it straight up so it's lined up perfect with the edge. I'm getting like a 45 right here. I'm going to kind of finger crease this. Then I'm going to pull this straight down on top of it. So I'm getting this box, and underneath I have a triangle. Okay? So that I can get this in the machine easier, I'm going to just take my pin and I'm just going to pin it right on the side just so I don't have to hold it so tight. I'm going to bring it back to my machine here. And now I need to start a 1/4 inch in from the edge. So I have this red line back here on my 1/4 inch foot, and I'm putting it on the edge of my binding here. I'm also making sure that my fabric is right lined up with my 1/4 inch seam allowance on my foot. I'll sew forward and bar tack going backwards, and then I'll go to the other corner and do that again. Okay, so here I am back on the other side. I've done all 4 corners, and I'm on the other side where I need to now join these. So I have stopped, leaving about an 8 to 10 inch opening between my start and end. That's about 10. And I'm going to cut my thread and raise my pressure foot and pull this out. I'll pull this to the side. Okay. So now, the only tool you really need is your binding itself. At the very end, because you can see I have plenty here. This is my joint point. I have plenty here. This is my extra. I am going to come and cut off a piece of my binding. So that is a piece from my extra binding that I have. I'm then going to take this and I'm going to just stretch it out, not too tight. You want to make sure it's a natural stretch so that you're getting it directly on your quilt. And I'm going to put a pin kind of where the beginning point is, so I know right where it is. I'm going to take my other fabric, my top one of my binding, and I'm going to put it on top. And that piece I cut a moment ago, this is my only tool I need to put down right where that pin is, wrong side so you can see it, and I'm laying it down. That's the distance of how much I have to cut off from where they overlap. So let me tell you that again. So this is where my binding is for my bottom one of my start. I take my ending and I'm going to put it right on top. That piece I cut off the end with the wrong side up, I'm going to just lay that down from the pin out so I can see that I need to cut it that distance without shaking. Okay, so when you go to cut this, because the pin is not exactly on the end, I am going to come in and I'm going to cut this just a skosh shorter than the actual piece of fabric. And so you can see that's how much I cut off extra. So about an 1/8, maybe a little less. Then I'm going to just put those aside. Then what you need to do is, now I have these down, I have these cut. I'm going to open this one up. Remember that press I did earlier? I'm going to open this up. I'm going to take this one and open it. And I'm going to kind of put them on top of each other, so that when I sew this on this fold, I'm sewing from the top left, if I was looking at directly on, to the bottom right. So I'm just going to bring this in. I'm going to put a pin just in so to hold it. If you need more than one, go for it. Whatever helps you out, that's what they're there for. And I'm going to sew on that fold that I made earlier, and I'm going to start up here, bar tack, go to the end, and bar tack. And then I'll check it before I cut it. Always check before you cut, because if you accidentally twisted one of these and you cut it, you'll need to take off your binding and start over again, and that's not fun. Been there, done that. So always check before you cut. So let me show you what I mean. So I'm going to put this in. It is going to be a little awkward, but when you get through this, it will be a nice tight binding. I'm going to put this in nice and flat. I'm going to get that in so that my fabric is flat. I'm on the fold. I'm going to stitch forward a few, stitch back a few. Make sure your bottom fabric's with you. Mine was not, mine was tucked, so gotta make sure that it's with me. Pull out my pins as I go. Again, I'm right on that fold that I made earlier. Readjust as you go. And then cut your threads. Now let me show you what I meant by checking before you cut. Is now I'm going to open this up, and when I pull on it, see how it comes in? It lays perfectly flat. So it was first was like this, where I stitched on the fold. Again, I pulled on it, and now it wants to lay nice and flat. Neither one of these are twisted. So now I can come in with these fancy dancy scissors of mine. They're thread snips. I do apologize. I bet that was very hard to see. And I'm going to cut that down to about 1/4 inch. And I'll meet you back at the iron. Here we are back at the iron. So what I'm going to do now is I need to just do a little press to this seam that we did. And now we are going to then line these up with the raw edges with my fold. Make sure everything is nice and tight. And I'm just going to come and do another press. And now we're going to go back to the sewing machine, and I'm going to just finish sewing that down. So here I am back at the sewing machine. I'm going to put the raw edge right next to the edge of my foot to give myself a 1/4 inch seam. And now I'm just going to stitch down. I should bar tack. Super long bar tack, but I got it.
And bar tack right there.
Now remember how I cut it a skosh a little bit smaller? Because I did that about 1/8 of an inch, I am not going to pinch right here. This is just going to float right in. If you get a little pinch here, that just means that you didn't cut it a skosh too small, like we had suggested. It's okay, normally when you do pinch, it is this side of the fold, not that side of the fold, so you won't see it unless you have way too much fabric. So then we're just going to bring that in, tack again. And now you're ready to finish your binding in whatever favorite method you like. So you could do it by hand, which is what I tend to do unless I'm giving something away to a child that's going to be washed multiple times. You know, they become tents and they become Superman and they become all sorts of things, so I want the binding to be strong. But if it's something I'm making for me or a wedding gift, I'll tend to do it by hand. So you would just take these and you would just fold this all the way over, and on the other side whip stitch it. So how you would do the corner when you're ready to do the corner is we would come and fold it back, and you would tuck one side under like that, and then bring the other side. I'm gonna turn on the other side. So bring the other side, where once you have it tucked, you would tuck like that. Let me get a pin so I get my fingers out of my way. So you get a good, nice mitered corner on the back. So again, I tucked that way first. And I brought this down. Got to pinch it. And tucked the other way. I know, very hard to see with my fingers in the way. And let's not try to bleed all over the place and give it a pin. And what you do, you'd stitch it in. If you're hand doing it, you would stitch up and back down and then continue it all the way around. And then that's how you would get a nice, tight, mitered binding all the way around, front and back.